Have you ever lost an AirPod or an earbud? Well, the mining company Rio Tinto lost something that's only a tenth the size of a single AirPod. They lost it somewhere in the Australian outback, and they really needed it back. Hi there, everyone. I'm Jeff, and this is Plain English, where JR and I help you upgrade your English with current events and trending topics. This is lesson number 550 on Monday, February 27th, 2023. Coming up today, Rio Tinto is a global mining company. They had a piece of machinery in Australia that needed to be fixed. So they shipped the machine from an iron ore mine to Perth, the biggest city in Western Australia. Along the way, a small piece of the machine fell off the truck. It was a capsule measuring just 8 millimeters by 6 millimeters. But this capsule had radioactive material that would seriously harm anyone who happened to pick it up. So Rio Tinto had to search a 1,400-kilometer highway to find something less than a tenth the size of an AirPod. On today's lesson, I'll tell you how that went and whether they found it. Cesium-137 is a radioactive metal that releases beta and gamma radiation. Industrial gauges use tiny capsules of cesium-137 to measure the density of certain materials. Rio Tinto is a mining giant with operations in Western Australia, a state in Australia. Western Australia is enormous, 10 times the size of Britain, with almost all its 3 million residents in one city and its surroundings. And in one of its mines in Western Australia, Rio Tinto had a machine that needed repair. The machine measured the density of iron ore, and that machine included a cesium-137 capsule. Rio Tinto hired a third-party transportation specialist to carefully pack up the machine, load it onto a truck, and drive it 1,400 kilometers to Perth, the state's largest city. The machine arrived on January 16th, 2023. On January 25th, the company discovered the machine was missing a piece, the cesium-137 capsule. It's the size of a pencil eraser. But because the capsule contained a radioactive material, Rio Tinto couldn't just forget about it. They needed to get it back. 2 days later, on January 27th, an urgent public announcement was made. The capsule was dangerous, and anyone who saw it should stay at least 5 meters away and call authorities. It's not accurate to say that people were panicking, but there was concern among the residents of this area. The overall risk to the public was minimal. This part of Australia is extremely remote. The population is very small. The chances of someone stumbling across this capsule were very small, but they weren't zero. The capsule could have been lodged in the treads of a tire, for example, or someone might have found it after pulling over to rest on the side of the road. There were two risks to human health. The first was exposure. If someone were standing near the capsule for an hour, that person would receive the equivalent of 17 X-rays. That's not a deadly dose, but it's not healthy either. The other risk was a radiation burn. If the capsule broke apart, it could contaminate the soil or come into contact with a person's skin. If that happened, it could cause serious radiation burns and permanent damage to a person's skin. So Rio Tinto had to search the Australian outback for something the size of a pea. Luckily, they had some clues. First, they knew the capsule was in the machine when it left the mine. That means that it almost definitely fell off the truck during the journey. Most of the journey was along a single long highway, the Great Northern Road, and the truck carrying the machine was equipped with GPS, so authorities could trace the exact route the truck followed. Still, that left a large area to search. The capsule could have been anywhere along the side of a 1,400-kilometer road. But the other clue was this. As a radioactive substance, cesium-137 almost announces its location to anyone who has the right equipment. So a team from Rio Tinto set off in slow-moving vehicles equipped with radiation detectors. They were driving in a car at 70 kilometers per hour when they saw spikes in the radiation detectors. They stopped and performed a more detailed search with yet more complicated equipment. That's when they finally located the capsule. It was just a few meters off the side of the road in a desolate stretch of highway far away from the nearest town. It's unlikely that anyone got near it. What a search. They were looking for something the size of a pencil eraser in the Australian outback. It shouldn't have been necessary, but it was a pretty good success story. A spokesman for Rio Tinto apologized, as well he should, and said the company would reimburse the government for the cost of the search. Today's expression is set off. You might remember we talked about set off in lesson 515 last October. The context then was to set off an explosion. That means to start an explosion. But set off has another meaning, and that means to begin a long or important journey. When we use set off, there's usually a lot of anticipation or excitement. You don't set off to go get a gallon of milk. You don't set off to go to the office in the morning. You set off on a long or important journey. In today's lesson, you heard that Rio Tinto, a mining firm, lost a radioactive capsule that could harm anyone that came into contact with it. Oops! They only had to search a 1,400-kilometer road to find it. But luckily, the capsule gives off radiation, so they could use special radiation detection equipment to find it. They were going to drive slowly up and down that road, monitoring the equipment the whole time, looking for spikes in radiation. That was the plan. On January 30th, multiple teams of researchers set off from different points along the road, all driving at between 50 and 70 kilometers per hour. Authorities estimated that the whole process could take up to 5 days. On January 30th, multiple teams began their long journey. This is an enormous road, so there were multiple search crews working at the same time. Now, even with multiple teams, it would take 5 days. So each team had a long journey. And this was important. This was not an ordinary morning commute. It was a long and important journey. So we can use set off. They set off on January 30th, and they found the capsule the next day. One of my best experiences was a long road trip. I was 21 years old. I remember in my last year in college. It was the winter break, so we had about a month off around the holidays. And my friend and I drove from my parents' house in New Jersey to California and back. We basically went from ocean to ocean. To make the trip fit in our vacation, we set off on Christmas night, 2002. We drove through the night to our first stop in Ohio. This was a long and important journey. My friend and I spent 3 weeks on the road. We passed through 21 states. We met a lot of people. We had a lot of great experiences. So it was a big trip, and that's why we can use set off. We set off on Christmas night 2002. 20 years ago that was, all of it in my little Toyota Corolla at the time. It's common to say set off early in the morning too, if you leave early. I loved exploring the more rural parts of the US, and living in Chicago was good for that. It's centrally located. But sometimes I'd go for an 8-hour drive or more. And whenever I did that, I tried to set off early in the morning. I wanted to get an early start, so I'd set off early in the morning. Here's another way you can use it. You can say set off for plus a destination. So on Christmas night, my friend and I set off for California. We began our journey to California. Have you ever seen the movie Brooklyn? I read the book. I watched the movie. Both are excellent. But it's about people who emigrated from Ireland to the United States. And back then, they took ocean-going ships. So they would set off for America on a long boat journey. Now that I think about it, I think you would not use set off if you're going on a plane. Maybe you can. I just can't think of an example. But in my personal opinion, set off is a word used for car trips, train trips, boat trips, but taking a plane is too much of a shortcut. Now it's time for a quote of the week. Here's one from Sylvia Plath. The worst enemy to creativity is self-doubt. Sylvia Plath was an American poet and short story writer. So think about that one. The worst enemy to creativity is self-doubt. And that brings us to the end of today's Plain English. You know, I was going to choose a different expression today. I was going to choose come into contact with, and I started researching the internet for good examples of come into contact with. And the number one search result was my very own episode, number 245, from March 2020. Now, I do have my own database of terms we've used in the past. I just forgot to look at it this time. But that gave me a great idea for all of you. If you ever hear an English expression and you want to know what it means, just type plain English and then the expression into your search results and see what you get. So type plain English stop short of, and you'll see our episode on stop short of. Or type plain English boil over, and you'll get our episode on boil over. And on. We have now 550 expressions you can do this with. Now, speaking of set off in an ocean-going ship from Northern Europe to America, the movie Titanic is back in theaters. Can you believe that? 25 years later. Now, I've already written Thursday's lesson, but maybe next week we'll talk about Titanic. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us again. We'll see you right back here on Thursday.